Hello, my lovely sleepyheads, and welcome back to Boring Sleepy History. So glad you could join me tonight for another dose of gently paced historical slumber. Find a cozy spot, maybe snuggle under a blanket, let your shoulders sink down, and allow your eyelids to get heavy. Let's drift off together, shall we? What time is it where you are right now? Are you nestled into bed, already drifting off, or perhaps just beginning to wind down after a long day? Wherever you are, I hope this evening finds you peaceful and relaxed. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy these sleepy tales. It really helps the channel grow and helps more people find this peaceful escape. And now, let's journey back in time. Imagine, if you will, the year is 1906. The air hangs thick and heavy, a humid blanket clinging to your skin. The sun has finally dipped below the horizon, but the oppressive heat hasn't quite relented. Dust, sweat, and the echoing clang of distant tools still linger in your ears from a day spent wrestling with the earth, digging, hauling, sweat stinging your eyes. You are a worker on the Panama Canal, your body aching, your mind weary, and all you crave is the simple, grounding routine of your evening, the cool splash of river water, the bland taste of your evening meal, the promise of a few short hours of sleep before the unrelenting sun demands you return to the endless digging. The heavy wooden door groans in protest as I push it open, the sound echoing strangely in the humid stillness of the evening. A wave of air, thick with the smell of damp wood and sweat, washes over me, a familiar and unwelcome embrace. The interior of the barracks is dimly lit by a single kerosene lamp, its yellow glow struggling to pierce the pervasive gloom. Dust motes dance in the faint light, each a tiny, swirling testament to the stillness of the air. The rough-hewn planks of the floor are worn smooth in places, a testament to countless weary feet that have traversed this space before mine. The air hangs heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from the mingled scents of sweat, damp clothing, and something faintly earthy, perhaps the lingering smell of the jungle itself. My own body feels heavy, each muscle screaming its protest against the day's exertions. I can hear the quiet sounds of my fellow laborers already settled in for the night. There's a low murmur of voices, a gentle rustling of clothing, the occasional sigh or groan escaping tired lips. It's a symphony of shared exhaustion, a silent testament to the collective struggle we all endure. One man hums a low, wordless tune, a monotonous melody that somehow feels oddly comforting. Another coughs, a rattling sound that echoes in the confined space. My own breathing comes in ragged gasps, each inhalation a struggle against the thick, humid air. I feel a dull ache behind my eyes, a throbbing that pulses in time with the relentless beat of my heart. My hands, raw and blistered from gripping the shovel's handle all day, feel clumsy and awkward as I unhook the tool from my shoulder, letting the weight of it settle heavily to the ground with a dull thud. The sound is surprisingly loud in the quiet of the barracks. Slowly, deliberately, I move toward a space near the back wall, away from the lamp's weak light. The rough-hewn cot is barely visible in the gloom, a barely discernible lump of wood and canvas. I sit heavily on its edge, the hard wood pressing against my tired bones. Even this simple act elicits a groan of protest from my aching body. I carefully remove my boots, the leather cool against my feverish skin. The simple act of taking them off feels like a small but significant victory. Each step I've taken today, from the dig site to this rough-hewn resting place, has felt like a monumental effort. Now, stripped of the weight of my boots and my tools, I feel a fraction lighter. Perhaps, just perhaps, I can finally let the exhaustion wash over me, allowing it to lull me into a dreamless slumber before the cycle begins again tomorrow. The sounds around me fade into a comforting drone, the breathing, the humming, the quiet coughs, forming a monotonous yet soothing backdrop to my own slow, heavy breaths.
The gnawing hunger in his belly overcomes the immediate exhaustion, prompting him to reach for the meager portion of food he'd set aside. It sat on a chipped tin plate, a stark reminder of the day's labor. A handful of rice, a few stringy beans, and a small piece of tough, salted meat. The steam rising from the rice carried a faint, almost pleasant aroma, a stark contrast to the lingering smell of sweat and damp earth that clung to everything in the barracks. He picked up his spoon, its rough edges digging lightly into his palm. The metal was cool against his hot skin, a small comfort in the humid air. He brought the spoon to his mouth, the first bite a welcome explosion of blandness. The rice was slightly overcooked, mushy, but the warmth spread through his belly, a slow, soothing heat that chased away the edge of the chill he felt despite the oppressive humidity. The beans were almost tasteless, their texture soft and yielding between his teeth, offering little resistance. He chewed slowly, savoring the simple act of eating, each mouthful a small victory against the emptiness. The small piece of meat was the highlight, though its toughness required considerable effort to chew. He savored the salt, a sharp counterpoint to the blandness of the rice and beans. With each bite, the gnawing hunger receded slightly, replaced by a dull ache of satisfaction. He listened to the quiet sounds of the barracks around him, the rhythmic snoring of his sleeping companions, the occasional creak of a cot, the distant hum of a generator somewhere outside. He looked around at the dimly lit space. The rough-hewn wood of the bunks and the walls was dark with age and grime. The flickering kerosene lamp cast long, dancing shadows, making the room feel even smaller, more confined. But despite the cramped conditions and the pervasive smell of sweat, there was a strange sense of comfort in the shared, quiet exhaustion. Everyone here understood the toll of the day, the relentless heat, the physical strain. In this shared silence, there was a bond, a silent recognition of their common plight. His thoughts drifted to home, to memories of meals shared with family, of laughter and conversation. Those memories were vivid yet distant, like faded photographs, almost unreal in their contrast to the harsh reality of his current life. Yet even the memory brought a fleeting warmth to his heart, a small spark of hope amidst the darkness. He finished his meal, the last bite swallowed with a quiet sigh. The tin plate was empty, but the lightness in his belly was far more satisfying than the food itself. He carefully washed the plate and spoon in a chipped tin basin,
the cool water a welcome relief on his still sweaty hands. He laid the utensils carefully aside, a sense of quiet contentment settling over him. The night was long, the work would resume at dawn, but for now, a quiet, weary peace settled over him. The rough-hewn planks of the cot dug into my back, a constant, irritating pressure that mirrored the throbbing ache in my head. I tried to settle, to let the exhaustion finally claim me, but sleep remained elusive. The darkness wasn't a comforting blanket, it was a thick, humid shroud clinging to me, amplifying every sound. The incessant chirping of insects was a relentless chorus, a high-pitched drone that vibrated in my bones. It was a sound I'd grown accustomed to during the day, a background hum to the labor. But now, in the stillness of the night, it felt invasive, a relentless assault on my weary senses. Beyond the chirping, a low, rumbling hum throbbed in the distance, the machinery continuing its relentless work even as we slept. It wasn't a loud sound, not exactly, but it was a constant, low-frequency vibration that seemed to penetrate the very fabric of the barracks, a physical reminder of the endless task at hand. The rhythm of it was strangely hypnotic, yet it prevented any descent into true rest. My mind wandered, pulled this way and that by its insistent pulse. And then there were the snores, a symphony of varied snores, each a testament to the exhaustion shared by my fellow laborers. Some were deep and guttural, like the rumble of distant thunder. Others were high-pitched and thin, like the squeak of a rusty hinge. One man's snores were punctuated by periodic gasps for air, creating an unsettling rhythm of life and near death within the suffocating silence. They were all deeply weary, their bodies surrendering to the demands of work, but their minds, like mine, refused to fully let go. My thoughts drifted. Fragmented images flickered through my mind, like fireflies in a dark night. The smell of freshly baked bread, the warmth of a crackling fire, a sun-drenched field stretching out before me. These were glimpses of a life far removed from the damp, suffocating air of the barracks. A life where the sounds of night were the gentle rustle of leaves, not the incessant chirping and groaning of the jungle. My mother's face appeared, fleetingly, then faded, leaving only a lingering ache in my chest. The memory was just a taste, a tantalizing reminder of a warmth I longed for, a connection to something other than the grueling reality of my current existence. These snatched glimpses of home were cruel taunts, teasing my mind with pleasure just beyond reach. The humidity clung to me, a heavy, damp weight that pressed down, making every breath a labored effort. The cot felt less like a bed and more like a torture device, its rough surface pressing into my aching muscles. The darkness pulsed and throbbed with the sounds of the night, and my exhausted mind, unable to find peace, drifted along their rhythms, a captive of a shared weariness that refused to yield to the promise of sleep. The humid air hung heavy, a suffocating blanket clinging to my skin. The sounds of the night, the rasping breath of the jungle, the distant chug of a steam engine, the rhythmic snores of my fellow laborers weaved a dissonant lullaby that refused to lull me to sleep. My body ached, a symphony of throbbing muscles and protesting joints. The rough-hewn cot offered little comfort, its hardness a constant reminder of my weary state. I tossed and turned, the stifling heat a relentless enemy. My mind, instead of finding rest, spun a chaotic tapestry of half-remembered dreams. Then the jungle sounds faded, replaced by a gentle breeze whispering through tall grass. The oppressive humidity dissolved, replaced by a cool, clean air. The scent of damp earth was gone, replaced by the sweet perfume of wildflowers. I was no longer lying on a hard cot, but sprawled on soft, yielding grass under a sky dusted with a million stars, brighter and clearer than any I'd ever seen. A small stream chuckled nearby, its water crystal clear, reflecting the starlight like a celestial mirror. I could almost taste its coolness on my tongue, a stark contrast to the stale, sweat-soaked taste that had been with me for weeks. The darkness was familiar, yet different. It was a comforting darkness, not the oppressive blackness of the jungle night. Nearby, a familiar old oak tree stood sentinel, its branches reaching up to the stars like welcoming arms. I remembered climbing that tree as a child, the rough bark scratching against my hands, the leaves rustling a secret language only I could understand. I could almost feel the sun's warmth on my face, a forgotten sensation, and hear the laughter of children playing in the distance, sounds so distant, so impossibly far away from this place. The images sharpened, becoming clearer, more real than the suffocating reality around me. I was running through a field of wildflowers, their colors vibrant and intense. The laughter of children playing in a meadow became a chorus in my ears, blending with the gentle murmur of the stream. It was a world of soft colors and gentle sounds, a place of peace and tranquility. My heart felt lighter, unburdened by the crushing weight of exhaustion and the relentless toil. A small wooden house, nestled amongst the trees, appeared on the horizon, its windows glowing warmly, promising comfort and refuge. It was home, or rather, a memory of home, a haven of warmth and affection. The faint scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, and I could almost feel the warmth of a hand resting gently on my head. It was a perfect moment, a perfect memory, snatched from the relentless grip of the present. But just as quickly as it arrived, the dream began to unravel. The sounds of the jungle seeped back in, the gentle breeze turning into the stifling humidity. The vibrant colors of the field faded, replaced by the monotonous green of the jungle canopy. The laughter of children was swallowed by the rasping breath of unseen creatures. The oak tree retreated, leaving me alone once more on the hard cot. The starlit sky vanished, replaced by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. The warm scent of freshly baked bread gave way to the lingering smell of sweat and damp earth. I was back, brutally yanked from my temporary escape, back to the relentless reality of the Panama Canal.
Drawn by a thirst that burns more fiercely than the humidity, I stumble towards the communal water bucket. Each step feels heavy, the wood of the barracks floor creaking under the weight of my weariness. The air hangs thick and still, a humid blanket clinging to my skin, amplifying the already intense heat radiating from my body. My muscles, screaming in protest from the day's labor, ache with a dull, persistent throb. The shovel, though long since relinquished, still weighs heavily in my memory, its phantom weight settling deep in my shoulders. The bucket itself is a simple thing, a galvanized steel cylinder perched precariously on a rough-hewn wooden stand. Its surface, dulled by years of use and the constant dampness, reflects the dim light of the kerosene lamp in a blurry, distorted image. I run a calloused hand along its cool metallic side, the sensation a stark contrast to the oppressive heat that has been my constant companion since dawn. The coolness is almost shocking, a momentary reprieve from the relentless assault on my senses. I dip the tin cup, its thin metal echoing faintly as it breaks the surface of the water. The water itself is not particularly pure. I can taste a slight hint of earth and a lingering metallic tang. But it is cold, and that is enough. I lift the cup to my lips, the cold water a welcome shock against my parched throat. It slides down, soothing the burning dryness, a temporary balm to my aching body and weary soul. The act is simple, almost ritualistic, yet it offers a profound sense of comfort. As I drink, I listen to the soft sounds of the barracks. The quiet snores of my fellow laborers continue their rhythmic symphony of exhaustion. The occasional cough or restless shift in position punctuates the silence, a testament to the shared weariness that binds us together. Outside, the jungle is alive with the rasping chirps and clicks of insects, a counterpoint to the quiet breathing within the cramped space. The sounds are strangely soothing, a comforting backdrop to my small act of self-care. A fleeting thought of home flickers in my mind, a memory of a cool glass of water drawn from a well, the water sparkling in the sunlight, tasting crisp and clean. The memory is bittersweet, a painful reminder of the distance that separates me from the simple comforts of my past. But the cold water in my cup anchors me to the present, a grounding force in this unfamiliar world. I finish the cup, the last drop bringing a fleeting sense of satisfaction. The metallic tang remains, a reminder of the harshness of this place, but the cold has eased the burning thirst, and a small measure of calm settles over me. The ache in my muscles still persists, but the immediate urgency is gone, replaced by a quiet weariness that feels for the moment almost manageable. I place the cup back onto the stand, the metallic clang a small, final sound in the quiet night. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and sweat, even thicker than usual. My own breath came shallow and quick, a counterpoint to the rhythmic snoring that usually lulled me into a fitful sleep. The kerosene lamp, sputtering weakly, cast long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls of the barracks. My body ached, every muscle screamed a silent protest against the day's labor. Sleep, despite my desperate need for it, remained elusive. The jungle's symphony, the chirping insects, the rustling leaves, the occasional distant rumble of machinery played on, an incessant soundtrack to my restless night. Then, a soft cough, a delicate, almost hesitant sound that sliced through the symphony of the night. It came from the cot beside mine. I turned my head, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through my neck and shoulders. The man in the cot, a fellow laborer, his face hidden in the shadows, was stirring. I could see the slight rise and fall of his chest, labored and uneven. He coughed again, a rasping sound that seemed to claw at the silence. His hand, thin and pale, reached out and grasped the rough canvas of the cot. His knuckles, white under the dim light, stood out sharply against his dark skin. He shifted,
a small pained movement that made him groan softly. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at the edges of my own exhaustion. I sat up, the rough wood of the cot pressing into my aching back. The humidity clung to me like a shroud. I leaned closer, peering into the gloom. His face, finally illuminated by the wavering lamplight, was pale, almost translucent. His eyes, usually bright and full of life, were dull and shadowed with worry. Sweat beaded on his forehead, clinging to the fine strands of his hair. He looked at me, his gaze weak but filled with an unspoken plea. There was no need for words. The urgency in his eyes spoke volumes. His chest heaved, each breath a struggle. I reached out, my hand hesitant at first, then firm as I gently placed it on his forehead. It was burning hot. "Are you all right?" I whispered, my voice rough with sleeplessness and concern. He shook his head, a barely perceptible movement. Another cough rattled his chest, this one deeper and more troubling than the others. The silence that followed felt thick and heavy, broken only by his ragged breathing. I could think of nothing to do. We were miles from any kind of medical help. All we had were each other, our shared exhaustion, and the overwhelming weight of the jungle around us. My heart ached with a mixture of fear and helplessness. What could I do? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as heavy and oppressive as the humid night itself. I stayed there, my hand resting on his forehead, a silent offering in the face of the encroaching darkness. The rhythmic sounds of the jungle that once soothed now felt menacing, a constant reminder of our isolation.
The air is filled thick with the smell of damp earth and sweat, even thicker than usual. My own breath came shallow and quick, a counterpoint to the rhythmic snoring that usually lulled me into a fitful sleep. The kerosene lamp, sputtering weakly, cast long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls of the barracks. My body ached. Every muscle screamed a silent protest against the day's labor. Sleep, despite my desperate need for it, remained elusive. The jungle's symphony, the chirping insects, the rustling leaves, the occasional distant rumble of machinery played on, an incessant soundtrack to my restless night. Then, a soft cough, a delicate, almost hesitant sound that sliced through the symphony of the night. It came from the cot beside mine. I turned my head, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through my neck and shoulders. The man in the cot, a fellow laborer, his face hidden in the shadows, was stirring. I could see the slight rise and fall of his chest, labored and uneven. He coughed again, a rasping sound that seemed to claw at the silence. His hand, thin and pale, reached out and grasped the rough canvas of the cot. His knuckles, white under the dim light, stood out sharply against his dark skin. He shifted, a small, pained movement that made him groan softly. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at the edges of my own exhaustion. I sat up, the rough wood of the cot pressing into my aching back. The humidity clung to me like a shroud. I leaned closer, peering into the gloom. His face, finally illuminated by the wavering lamplight, was pale, almost translucent. His eyes, usually bright and full of life, were dull and shadowed with worry. Sweat beaded on his forehead, clinging to the fine strands of his hair.
He looked at me, his gaze weak but filled with an unspoken plea. There was no need for words. The urgency in his eyes spoke volumes. His chest heaved, each breath a struggle. I reached out, my hand hesitant at first, then firm as I gently placed it on his forehead. It was burning hot. "Are you all right?" I whispered, my voice rough with sleeplessness and concern. He shook his head, a barely perceptible movement. Another cough rattled his chest, this one deeper and more troubling than the others. The silence that followed felt thick and heavy, broken only by his ragged breathing. I could think of nothing to do. We were miles from any kind of medical help. All we had were each other, our shared exhaustion, and the overwhelming weight of the jungle around us. My heart ached with a mixture of fear and helplessness. What could I do? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as heavy and oppressive as the humid night itself. I stayed there, my hand resting on his forehead, a silent offering of comfort in the face of the encroaching darkness. The rhythmic sounds of the jungle, that once so soothed, now felt menacing, a constant reminder of our isolation.
The rough-hewn wooden door creaked shut behind me. The familiar smell of damp wood and sweat, a heavy blanket in the still dim light of the barracks. My steps were slower now, weighed down not just by fatigue, but by a new, heavier feeling, a shared vulnerability that hung in the air like the clinging humidity. The sick man, his breathing still ragged, lay on his cot, a thin blanket pulled up to his chin. He was pale, almost translucent in the weak lamplight, his usually strong features softened by exhaustion and illness. Several of the men were gathered around him, a quiet circle of concern. It wasn't spoken, not in words, but in the small gestures, the gentle pat on the arm from one man, the quiet offer of a sip of water from another. One was carefully fanning him with a tattered piece of canvas, the slow, rhythmic motion a counterpoint to the man's labored breathing. There was a hushed reverence in the air, a solemnity that went beyond simple politeness. These were men who had faced relentless sun, back-breaking labor, and the constant threat of illness. Yet in this shared adversity, something else had blossomed, a quiet camaraderie, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. I sat on the edge of my own cot, my muscles still aching, my head throbbing faintly. I watched them, these men hardened by toil, softened by empathy. The old woman, her face lined with age and hardship, sat beside the sick man, her hand resting lightly on his forehead. She spoke in low tones, a soothing rhythm of words that I couldn't understand, yet somehow felt deeply. It was a language beyond the spoken word, a language of comfort and shared experience. The air hung heavy with the unspoken anxieties, the fear of sickness, the worry about the future, the ever-present awareness of our fragile existence in this unforgiving land. These things were not voiced, yet they permeated the room, binding us together in a silent pact of shared vulnerability. It was a strange kind of peace, born from hardship, a quiet strength derived from knowing we weren't alone. Each of us carried the weight of the day, the weight of our fears, but we carried them together, a silent burden shared under the dim glow of the kerosene lamp. The rhythmic creak of the cot, the the soft rustle of the canvas fan, and the old woman's quiet humming formed a lullaby of shared endurance. In that small space, surrounded by the sounds of the jungle night, we found a strange and unexpected solace in our shared weakness. The hours passed, each tick of the clock feeling heavier than the last. But the silence was not empty. It was filled with an unspoken promise of support, a quiet testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of shared hardship. The atmosphere felt less heavy, less suffocating, and the humid air somehow didn't seem so oppressive. There was a new warmth to the dimly lit space, a warmth that wasn't generated by heat, but by the strength of togetherness. The hours passed, each tick of the clock feeling heavier than the last. But the silence was not empty. It was filled with an unspoken promise of support, a quiet testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of shared hardship. The atmosphere felt less heavy, less suffocating, and the humid air somehow didn't seem so oppressive. There was a new warmth to the dimly lit space, a warmth that wasn't generated by heat, but by the strength of togetherness.
The air hung heavy, still, thick with the humid breath of the jungle, even as the sun climbed higher, painting the rough-hewn walls of the barracks in shades of muted gold. The lingering smell of sickness clung to the air, a faint sour undercurrent to the usual mix of sweat and damp wood. My own body ached, a dull throb in my bones, a constant reminder of yesterday's labor. I sat on my cot, the rough wood digging into my thighs, sipping lukewarm water from my tin cup. The sick man, his breathing still ragged, lay quietly on his pallet nearby. A low moan escaped his lips, a sound swallowed by the quiet murmurs of the waking barracks. I watched the others stir, the slow, deliberate movements of men waking from a restless sleep. A few mumbled greetings passed between them, the sounds muted, almost apologetic. The rhythmic clatter of tin plates and the soft hiss of steam from the communal pot announced the beginning of the day, a ritual as familiar as the rising sun itself. My stomach growled, a hollow ache that demanded attention, but the sight of the suffering man beside me dulled the sharpness of my hunger. Then I saw her, the old woman from the far corner, her face a road map of wrinkles, etched by years of toil and hardship under this unforgiving sun. Her eyes, though clouded with age, held a depth of understanding that transcended words. She moved with a surprising agility, considering her years, her movements deliberate and graceful despite the obvious stiffness in her joints. She carried a small, dented tin pot, steam curling from its open top like a wisp of smoke. The air around her was filled with a fragrant aroma, something earthy and sweet, a comforting contrast to the stale air of the barracks. She approached me slowly, her steps measured and steady. She didn't speak, but her gaze held mine, a silent acknowledgement of our shared burden. She offered me the pot, the warmth radiating through the thin metal. I accepted it with a grateful nod, the steam warming my face as I inhaled the rich herbal scent. It tasted of something familiar, something that stirred a distant memory of home, perhaps a wildflower tea my mother used to brew, or the scent of wood smoke from a long-ago hearth. It was a simple gesture, a small act of kindness in the face of shared adversity, yet it felt profound. The warmth spread through me, not just in my stomach,
but in my soul, a tangible balm for my aching body and weary spirit. The old woman simply smiled, a knowing, gentle smile, before turning to tend to the sick man, her movements quiet and reassuring. The aroma of the tea, gentle and fragrant, lingered in the air, a small beacon of hope in the dim light of the barracks. It was a taste of something beyond, the harsh reality of our existence, a reminder that even in the midst of suffering, human kindness could still bloom. The warmth of the old woman's offering spread through me, a slow, comforting tide against the chill that had settled deep in my bones. The tea, whatever it was, some blend of herbs, I imagined, gathered from the jungle itself, was earthy and slightly sweet, a surprising counterpoint to the bitter taste of exhaustion that had clung to me since sunrise. The steam rising from the chipped tin mug warmed my hands, a tangible comfort in the humid air. My aching muscles, usually a constant throb, felt slightly less intense, the tension easing with each slow sip. The quiet of the barracks, usually punctuated by the rasp of breathing and the occasional restless shift, was unusually still. Even the insects seemed to have hushed their chorus for a moment, creating an unnatural quiet that prickled my nerves. It felt too peaceful, too still. My mind, usually a chaotic jumble of anxieties and memories, had calmed, lulled by the rhythmic sipping and the pervasive warmth of the drink. Then a sound, faint at first, almost swallowed by the humid stillness, a rhythmic cry cut through the air. It was a high-pitched, almost animalistic wail, repeated at regular intervals, a sound both unsettling and strangely hypnotic. It didn't sound like any animal I recognized from the jungle. Curiosity, a flicker of something other than exhaustion, sparked within me. I carefully eased myself back against the rough-hewn wood of my cot, the faded fabric scratching against my skin. I listened again, straining my ears to pinpoint the source. It was definitely coming from outside, beyond the crude wooden walls of our barracks. A shiver, unrelated to the night's chill, snaked down my spine. The crack in the wall, barely wider than my thumb, offered a meager view of the world outside. I cautiously pressed my eye to it, shielding the faint light from disturbing the fragile quiet within. The moon, a pale disk in the inky sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the muddy path. The air hung heavy and still, a stark contrast to the bustling activity of the day. But then I saw it. A figure, small and indistinct in the dim light, moved rhythmically back and forth, their arms raised in what looked like a desperate plea. The figure's cries, now closer, resonated with a desperate quality, amplifying the mystery of their presence in the silence of the night. I couldn't make out much detail. The distance, the poor light, and the limited view through the crack all obscured my vision. But I saw enough. It seemed to be a child. A small child, alone, calling out into the darkness, its voice filled with a loneliness that mirrored my own. A loneliness that transcended language and culture and spoke directly to the tired ache in my heart. The rhythmic cries stopped abruptly as the child stumbled and fell, a small, almost inaudible whimper following the fall. My heart ached for the little child lost in the night, and a familiar tiredness pressed down on me again. I considered how difficult it was to find assistance, whether I should even try to help.
I pulled back from the crack. The image of the child burned into my mind. The warmth of the tea had faded, replaced by a cold knot of unease and a growing sense of responsibility. The quiet in the barracks felt heavier now, the silence charged with the child's silent cry. The humid air seemed thicker, pressing down on me with the weight of unspoken worry. The rough-hewn wood of the barracks door creaked a protest as I pushed it open, the cool night air washing over me like a balm. It was a stark contrast to the stifling humidity that clung to everything inside, a humid blanket I'd grown accustomed to, yet still found oppressive. The air outside felt thinner, lighter, almost clean by comparison. My bare feet touched the damp earth, the cool mud a surprising comfort against the heat that still lingered in my bones. The rhythmic chirping of insects continued, a constant soundtrack to this strange existence, but somehow felt less intense outside the confines of the barracks. The call had been faint, almost lost amongst the usual night chorus, but it had tugged at something deep within me, a child's cry, small and distressed. A wave of concern, a sense of responsibility, a feeling I hadn't expected to find myself experiencing here, in this harsh land, pushed me forward. I wasn't a father, hadn't known the weight of such a responsibility, yet here I was, drawn by the sound, compelled to act. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long, dancing shadows across the uneven ground. My eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness, but the faint glow helped me pick my way through the undergrowth. The air itself felt alive, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I could feel the prickly leaves brushing against my skin, the uneven ground beneath my feet testing my balance. But I pushed on, guided by that fragile cry. It grew louder as I approached a small clearing near the edge of the camp. There, nestled beneath the gnarled roots of a giant tree, was a small figure huddled against the earth. A child, no older than 5 or 6, his small form trembling, tears streaking his dirty face. He was clutching a worn doll, its painted face barely visible in the gloom. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear and exhaustion, and let out a small shuddering sob. My heart ached at the sight of his vulnerability, such stark fragility in this harsh and unforgiving place. I knelt beside him, my own exhaustion momentarily forgotten. He didn't speak, just stared at me with those big, tear-filled eyes. I reached out slowly, extending a hand, offering him a silent reassurance. He hesitated for a moment, then reached out and grasped my finger, his tiny hand surprisingly strong. The fear in his eyes was still there, but it was beginning to soften, replaced with a tentative trust. I felt a strange calm wash over me, a quiet sense of purpose in this unexpected moment of tenderness. I spoke softly, murmuring words of comfort that came unbidden, simple words in my native tongue. He seemed to understand, to feel the reassurance in my tone. I gently pulled him into my arms, feeling his small, trembling body relax against mine. For a long moment, we just sat there, the child clinging to me, nestled safely against my chest, his sobbing slowly subsiding. The sounds of the jungle faded into the background as I held him close, the weight of his small body surprisingly comforting. The weight of the day, the exhaustion, the harshness of our surroundings, all seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a strange sense of peace and unexpected connection in this dark, lonely place. The distant hum of machinery felt muffled, the insects chirping a distant lullaby.
The rough-hewn wood of the barracks door creaked a protest as I pushed it open, the cool night air washing over me like a balm. It was a stark contrast to the stifling humidity that clung to everything inside, a humid blanket I'd grown accustomed to, yet still found oppressive. The air outside felt thinner, lighter, almost clean by comparison. My bare feet touched the damp earth, the cool mud, a surprising comfort against the heat that still lingered in my bones. The rhythmic chirping of insects continued, a constant soundtrack to this strange existence, but somehow felt less intense outside the confines of the barracks. The call had been faint, almost lost amongst the usual night chorus, but it had tugged at something deep within me. A child's cry, small and distressed. A wave of concern, a sense of responsibility, a feeling I hadn't expected to find myself experiencing here, in this harsh land, pushed me forward. I wasn't a father, hadn't known the weight of such a responsibility, yet here I was, drawn by the sound, compelled to act. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long, dancing shadows across the uneven ground. My eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness, but the faint glow helped me pick my way through the undergrowth. The air itself felt alive, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I could feel the prickly leaves brushing against my skin, the uneven ground beneath my feet testing my balance, but I pushed on, guided by that fragile cry. It grew louder as I approached a small clearing near the edge of the camp. There, nestled beneath the gnarled roots of a giant tree, was a small figure huddled against the earth. A child, no older than 5 or 6, his small form trembling, tears streaking his dirty face. He was clutching a worn doll, its painted face barely visible in the gloom. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear and exhaustion, and let out a small, shuddering sob. My heart ached at the sight of his vulnerability, such stark fragility in this harsh and unforgiving place. I knelt beside him, my own exhaustion momentarily forgotten. He didn't speak, just stared at me with those big, tear-filled eyes. I reached out slowly, extending a hand, offering him a silent reassurance. He hesitated for a moment, then reached out and grasped my finger, his tiny hand surprisingly strong. The fear in his eyes was still there, but it was beginning to soften, replaced with a tentative trust. I felt a strange calm wash over me, a quiet sense of purpose in this unexpected moment of tenderness. I spoke softly, murmuring words of comfort that came unbidden, simple words in my native tongue. He seemed to understand, to feel the reassurance in my tone. I gently pulled him into my arms, feeling his small, trembling body relax against mine. For a long moment, we just sat there, the child clinging to me, nestled safely against my chest, his sobbing slowly subsiding. The sounds of the jungle faded into the background as I held him close, the weight of his small body surprisingly comforting. The weight of the day, the exhaustion,
The harshness of our surroundings all seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a strange sense of peace and unexpected connection in this dark, lonely place. The distant hum of machinery felt muffled, the insects chirping a distant lullaby.
The child, small and shivering, clung to me, his eyes wide and reflecting the dim light. He hadn't spoken since I found him, lost and alone near the edge of the clearing. The air hung heavy, still thick with the humidity that clung to everything like a damp shroud, even as the first faint blush of dawn painted the eastern sky. The rhythmic chirping of crickets had lessened, replaced by the more sporadic calls of waking birds. A low, almost imperceptible rustling in the undergrowth had caught my attention earlier, but I'd dismissed it as the usual nocturnal activity of the jungle. Now it seemed closer, more insistent. My hand instinctively went to the worn shovel handle, still resting against my hip. It felt oddly reassuring, a familiar weight in the uncertain darkness. The child snuggled closer, his small body trembling. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scanned the shadows, trying to pierce the gloom. The dense foliage offered little relief, only deepened the unsettling mystery of the approaching presence. Then a distant figure emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the faint pre-dawn light. It moved slowly, deliberately, its form indistinct in the low light. I could make out only the rough outline of a person, their movement cautious, almost hesitant. Was it a threat? A fellow laborer? A supervisor making his rounds? Or something else? The uncertainty was a cold knot in my stomach. The figure drew closer, the rustling in the undergrowth becoming more distinct, a subtle counterpoint to the growing light. I strained to see more clearly, my muscles tense, ready to spring into action to protect the child in my arms. The figure stopped a short distance away, their silhouettes still unclear, but their posture seemed less menacing than I had initially feared. The child, sensing my anxiety, whimpered softly. I tried to calm my breathing, focusing on the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of my chest, a simple act to steady my shaking hands. My eyes darted from the approaching figure to the child nestled against me. My mind raced, trying to assess the situation, to anticipate what might happen next. The approaching person remained motionless, seemingly observing us from the shadows. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with anticipation, broken only by the child's soft whimpers and the chirping of a lone bird in the distance. Slowly, the figure raised a hand, a gesture that seemed to be intended as a peace offering. It was a small movement, but it was enough to ease some of my tension. A shadow of relief, however fragile, began to uncurl in my chest.
The first hint of light, a pale, watery wash across the eastern sky, barely pierced the suffocating humidity clinging to the air within the barracks. My eyes, heavy-lidded and unwilling, fluttered open. The rhythmic snoring of my fellow laborers still filled the air, a strangely comforting counterpoint to the unsettling silence that always preceded the dawn. Then, in the distance, a sound I knew all too well, a sound that clawed its way into my consciousness, ripped away the last vestiges of sleep. The clang, the rhythmic, metallic clang of the steam shovels. It was the dawn chorus of the Panama Canal, a symphony of steel and sweat that announced the start of another day, another grueling cycle of toil. The sound, familiar as my own heartbeat, simultaneously filled me with a weary dread and a quiet, stubborn determination. Dread because it signaled the return to the unrelenting sun, the aching muscles, the relentless humidity that clung to my skin like a damp shroud. Determination because it was the sound of survival, the rhythm of progress, a reminder that each swing of the shovel, each drop of sweat, brought me closer to the end, to whatever awaited me beyond this relentless, unforgiving landscape. I lay there for a moment, listening to the clang grow louder, closer, its metallic resonance echoing the emptiness in my gut. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of damp wood and sweat, the remnants of the night clinging to everything. The kerosene lamp, its wick nearly spent, cast long, wavering shadows across the rough-hewn planks of the floor. The faces of my sleeping companions, etched with exhaustion, were half hidden in the darkness, their quiet breaths a testament to the shared weariness that bound us together. The distant sounds of the jungle, the chirping of crickets fading into the approaching light, the rustling of leaves in the unseen depths, were slowly being drowned out by the growing cacophony of the worksite. A faint smell of wood smoke, carrying on the morning breeze, promised the weak coffee and meager rations that would fuel us for another day's labor. Each clang of the steam shovel was a hammer blow to my already aching body, a relentless reminder of the task that lay ahead. Yet, somehow, amidst the gnawing fear, a spark of defiance flickered within me. I pushed myself up, my muscles protesting with a chorus of creaks and groans. The rough wood of my cot dug into my back, a minor discomfort compared to the far greater discomfort that awaited me outside. I sat on the edge for a moment, the cool wood a momentary relief against the still warm skin. My gaze drifted to the rough-spun clothes I'd discarded near the cot, their dampness a reminder of the sweat-soaked day already looming. Slowly, deliberately, I began to dress, the simple act a testament to my resolve, the methodical repetition a small rebellion against the overwhelming weariness that threatened to consume me. The clanging of the shovels intensified, drawing closer. The jungle sounds were now almost entirely obscured, replaced by the steady rhythm of mechanical toil. I took a deep breath, the humid air filling my lungs, and stood. The day had begun. Another day of relentless labor under the scorching sun. Another day closer to the end of this arduous journey. Another day to endure.
The rhythmic clang of the steam shovels, a familiar, unwelcome alarm clock, had barely begun its morning assault when it was interrupted. A quiet tap, tap, tap on the rough-hewn wooden wall of the barracks. So soft, so subtle, it might have been the frantic drumming of a distant insect, if not for the ensuing whisper. A hushed, urgent sound carried on the still, humid air. It slithered through the cracks in the wood, a snake of secrecy in the pre-dawn gloom. I held my breath, Straining my ears, the sounds of the camp, usually a deafening chorus of activity, seemed to fade into a muted hum, allowing the whisper to weave its way into my consciousness. It was a woman's voice, low and strained, but carrying a note of desperation. I couldn't make out the words, just the urgency in the tone. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, usually so overpowering, retreated to the edges of my awareness, replaced by a prickle of unease. My heart thumped against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that resonated with the earlier tapping. A wave of heat rose from my chest, not the oppressive humidity of the jungle, but something sharper, more immediate, the feeling of impending trouble. The coarse fabric of my blanket felt suddenly rough against my skin, a reminder of the harsh realities surrounding me. My fellow laborers, still wrapped in the slumber of exhaustion, remained oblivious to the clandestine communication on the other side of the wall. I shifted slightly, the thin mattress rustling beneath me. The action created a small sound that seemed to echo in the otherwise silent barracks. I hesitated, wrestling with a familiar conflict, the instinct to bury my head and ignore the unknown, versus a prickle of responsibility, a faint echo of empathy. I had seen the toll this life was taking on us all, the weariness etched into our faces, the fragility revealed in moments of sickness. The vulnerability was palpable, shared across the communal space. With a deep breath, pushing aside the weight of my fatigue, I felt for my crudely fashioned knife, a small comfort in the uncertain darkness. It wasn't much, a dull blade more suited to cutting rations than defending myself, but it was all I had. The slight metallic chill of the steel against my fingers offered a small sense of control in a situation that felt utterly out of my hands. The tapping came again, a little more insistent this time. The whisper followed, clearer now, though still indecipherable. It was a pleading tone, laced with fear. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to decipher the words, the texture of the wood rough against my skin. A faint scent, different from the usual musk of the barracks, something sweeter, like wood smoke, and was that the faintest hint of something floral? A strange perfume in this world of sweat and earth. I cautiously rose, the movement stiff and slow after a night of uneasy rest. The rough-hewn wood of my cot felt cold against my bare skin. I approached the wall, my hand hovering over the knife. The tapping ceased. Silence descended once more, heavy and expectant. Then, a single, almost imperceptible scratch on the wood, a tiny sound, barely audible, like a secret signal. My hand tightened around the knife, yet the movement was still hesitant. The urgency of the whispered plea pulled at me, stronger than my fear. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to decipher the words, the texture of the wood rough against my skin. A faint scent, different from the usual musk of the barracks, something sweeter, like wood smoke, and was that the faintest hint of something floral? A strange perfume in this world of sweat and earth. I cautiously rose, the movement stiff and slow after a night of uneasy rest. The rough-hewn wood of my cot felt cold against my bare skin. I approached the wall, my hand hovering over the knife. The tapping ceased. Silence descended once more, heavy and expectant.
Then, a single, almost imperceptible scratch on the wood, a tiny sound, barely audible, like a secret signal. My hand tightened around the knife, yet the movement was still hesitant. The urgency of the whispered plea pulled at me, stronger than my fear.
The rough-hewn planks of the barracks wall, usually a source of only muted sound, suddenly felt strangely alive. A faint scratching, then a soft pressure, like a feather brushing against wood. My heart, already weary from the night's restless sleep, thumped a little harder. A weathered hand, gnawed like the roots of an ancient tree, gently pushed aside the planks, revealing the worried face of the old woman from the far corner of the barracks. Her eyes, usually filled with a quiet wisdom that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 sunrises, now held a silent plea for help. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the low hum of the night, a night already thick with the usual sounds of the jungle. The air hung heavy, thick with the familiar humidity that clung to everything, a damp shroud. The kerosene lamp flickered weakly, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of the barracks. The faces of my sleeping colleagues were only dimly visible, their breaths shallow and even, a stark contrast to the rising panic in my chest. The old woman's gaze, insistent and urgent, drew me from the comforting darkness to the unsettling reality of her silent appeal. Hesitantly, I reached out, my hand trembling slightly as I touched the rough wood. The wood felt cool and damp against my skin, a familiar comfort in the face of the unexpected. I cautiously moved the planks further, creating a small opening just large enough to see her more clearly. Her face, etched with the lines of a life lived under a relentless sun, was pale in the dim light. Her eyes, wide and filled with a fear I hadn't seen in her before, darted nervously around the room, as if she feared someone or something was watching. She spoke again, her voice a low rasp barely audible above the persistent chirping of crickets outside. This time I strained to understand. It was a name, whispered almost inaudibly, a name I didn't recognize, but the tone, the fear in her voice, painted a vivid picture of something terrible. The name felt heavy, laden with an unspoken sorrow, hanging in the air like the suffocating humidity. My mind raced, trying to decipher the meaning behind her silent plea. Was it a personal matter, a problem with another worker, or something far more serious, something that extended beyond the confines of our shared misery? The distant rumble of a steam shovel, a sound that normally marked the beginning of another grueling day, seemed to recede into the background, replaced by the urgent need to understand and respond to the old woman's silent cry for help. The fear in her eyes mirrored a growing unease within me. The dampness of the night suddenly felt oppressive, as if it pressed down on me, mirroring the weight of her unspoken fear. I quickly found my own meager oil lamp, the flickering light casting a small circle of illumination on her anxious face. I silently indicated that I would help, motioning for her to lead the way. Her hand grasped mine, surprisingly strong despite her age, a silent promise of trust in the face of an unknown fear. I felt a responsibility settling upon me, the weight of it almost as heavy as the shovel I carried each day. We stepped out into the night together, leaving the relative safety of the barracks behind. The old woman's hand, gnarled and surprisingly strong, rested briefly on my arm before she withdrew. Her whisper, barely audible above the chirping insects, guided me towards the edge of the camp. The air, thick and heavy even at this late hour, clung to me like a shroud. The path was little more than a muddy track, barely visible in the inky blackness. Each step sent a tremor through the ground, a small disturbance in the otherwise quiet night. I could feel the damp earth clinging to the worn soles of my boots, the uneven ground threatening to trip me at any moment. The jungle pressed in close, a wall of unseen shadows and rustling leaves. Fear, sharp and cold, prickled my skin. The whispers of the jungle, the rustle of unseen creatures, the snap of a twig, became amplified in my ears. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking danger. Yet the old woman's calm demeanor, her unwavering certainty, fueled a strange, quiet resolve within me. I trusted her, even without understanding fully why. She knew this place, its secrets and its dangers, better than I ever could. The path led away from the familiar sounds of the barracks, deeper into the heart of the jungle. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of damp earth intensified, mixing with a sharper, unfamiliar scent. Something earthy and decaying, perhaps rotting vegetation or a hidden stream. The distant sound of the river became more prominent, a low hum that vibrated through the ground. The darkness was almost absolute, only the faintest starlight filtering through the dense canopy above. I stumbled over a root, the sudden pain a jolt in the stillness. My breath hitched in my throat, the sound oddly loud in the oppressive quiet. A branch scraped against my arm, leaving a scratch that burned slightly. The physical discomfort served as a grounding reminder of my surroundings, a counterpoint to the creeping fear. The old woman's instructions, relayed in short, sharp whispers, were surprisingly precise. She knew the layout of the jungle paths like the back of her hand. I followed her directions blindly, trusting her instinct as much as her words. The terrain became steeper, the ground more treacherous. I imagined the child, lost and alone, perhaps injured or scared, and the urgency of the situation bolstered my resolve. Suddenly, the river was before me, a dark, swirling mass under the starlit sky. The current sounded stronger here, the sound a low, insistent growl. The air was cooler, heavy with the scent of the water and the moist earth. The old woman pointed towards a narrow, overgrown path leading down towards the riverbank. The child, she'd said, was near the old fallen tree, close to the water's edge. A lump formed in my throat. The thought of the child, alone, in this darkness, so close to the perilous river, filled me with a surge of protective intensity. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet night. I took a deep breath and started down the embankment.
The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation. Each step crunched softly on the unseen path, the darkness broken only by the faintest sliver of pre-dawn light filtering through the dense canopy overhead. The old woman's whispered directions, barely audible above the chirping insects and the rustling leaves, echoed in my ears. Fear,
sharp and cold, pricked at the edges of my exhaustion. I clutched the rough-hewn wood of my shovel, its familiar weight a small comfort in the unnerving silence. The jungle pressed in, a wall of shadows and unseen things. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet symphony of the night. Each rustle, each snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Was it an animal, another person, or just the wind playing tricks in the dense undergrowth? The uncertainty was more terrifying than any known danger. Then, a faint whimper, barely audible above the rustling leaves, cut through the night's hushed sounds. It was a child's cry, small and thin, filled with a desperate fragility that pierced the darkness. Following the sound, I pushed aside a curtain of hanging vines, their damp surfaces clinging to my skin. The air grew thick and still, the scent of decay intensified. I found myself at the edge of a cluster of dense bushes, their leaves heavy with dew. The whimper grew louder, closer. Carefully, I parted the thick foliage, my hand reaching out, hesitant, afraid of what I might find. Beneath a sprawling root larger than any man, its gnarled branches twisting like ancient arms, I saw him. He was a small boy, no older than 7, his face smudged with dirt, his eyes wide with terror. His clothes were torn and dirty, clinging to his thin frame. He trembled, his small body shuddering with silent sobs. He didn't cry out, didn't speak, just stared up at me with an intensity that mirrored the fear in my own heart. Slowly, carefully, I knelt beside him. The ground was damp and cold against my knees, but I barely noticed. My own breath hitched in my chest. I reached out a hand, my fingers trembling slightly, and gently touched his arm. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He just continued to stare, his eyes reflecting the muted light filtering through the leaves above. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant sounds of the camp. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. He was alive, he was unharmed. The fear hadn't entirely left me, but it was replaced, slowly, by a different kind of emotion. A quiet, intense determination to keep him safe. I spoke to him, my voice low and soothing, offering words of comfort and reassurance that felt clumsy and inadequate in the face of such profound fear. He didn't respond, but his trembling subsided slightly, his gaze softening just a fraction. I pulled my jacket tighter around him, offering the meager warmth it could provide against the chill of the night. He leaned into me, his small body seeking the small comfort of my presence.
The air hung heavy and still, the only sound the child's soft, shuddering breaths and the rustling of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. My hand instinctively tightened around the rough cloth of the child's makeshift blanket. The pre-dawn light was a weak, watery gray, barely enough to pierce the dense jungle shadows. And then I saw it, a movement, a shift in the darkness at the edge of the clearing. A figure, indistinct at first, began to emerge from the shadows, its silhouette stretched and distorted by the gloom.
My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drum against the quiet stillness of the night. Was it friend or foe? My muscles tensed, ready to spring into action to protect the child huddled beside me. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, its approach measured and cautious. I couldn't make out any details, no features, no clothing, just a dark shape against the faint light, a slow, creeping encroachment on the small space we occupied. My breath hitched in my throat. The child stirred, a whimper escaping his lips. I hushed him, my voice barely above a whisper, a low rumble in the pre-dawn quiet. The figure stopped, halting its advance a good distance away. It remained motionless for what felt like an eternity. The only sound, the rhythmic chirping of unseen insects, and the pounding of my own blood in my ears. Slowly, tentatively, the figure raised a hand, a slow, almost hesitant gesture. The hand was dark, but I could make out a shape. It wasn't a weapon. The movement was peaceful, not aggressive, and the hesitation spoke of uncertainty, not malice. My tension began to ease, a fraction at a time. Perhaps, just perhaps, this wasn't a threat. The figure continued its slow approach, pausing again and again, as if testing the air for danger, for rejection. My hand, still clutching the child's blanket, relaxed slightly, but I remained alert, ready to react at a moment's notice. As the figure drew closer, I could begin to make out the rough outline of clothing, the slightly hunched posture suggesting weariness, a familiarity that settled the fear gnawing at my insides. This was one of us, one of the weary souls toiling alongside me. A flicker of recognition sparked in my tired brain. The silhouette, the slightly stooped frame. It was the fellow laborer, the one with the kind eyes and quiet smile, the one who always shared his meager tobacco. Relief washed over me, a wave of warm comfort in the chill of the pre-dawn air. He'd seen us, heard us. He was coming to help. He stopped a few paces away, holding out something wrapped in a faded piece of cloth. He spoke in a hushed tone, a low murmur barely audible above the natural symphony of the jungle. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was gentle, reassuring. His eyes, finally visible in the growing light, held a depth of compassion that mirrored my own exhaustion and relieved me of my fear. He was here to help. The child's whimpers subsided, replaced by soft breaths of returning calm.
Overcome with a wave of bone-deep weariness, I collapsed onto my own cot, the rough wood a surprisingly welcome embrace against my aching body. The thin, scratchy blanket felt like a shroud, but even its irritating texture was preferable to the relentless pressure of my exhaustion. My muscles, screaming in protest just moments before, now seemed to melt into the worn wood, surrendering to the inevitable pull of sleep. The air, still thick with the humidity of the night, felt less oppressive now, a subtle shift that mirrored the easing of the tension in my shoulders. My head sank into the slightly damp pillow, a rough-spun cloth, barely more than a thin layer against the hard wood, and a sigh escaped my lips, a sound like escaping air from a punctured lung. The rhythmic snoring of my fellow laborers faded into a distant drone, a low hum that resonated with the steady beat of my own heart. Each breath felt like a small victory, a slow expansion and contraction against the weight of the day. The scent of sweat and damp earth, so pungent just hours ago, had softened, blended with the faint, almost imperceptible smell of wood smoke drifting in from somewhere beyond the walls of the barracks. The world outside the barracks remained a cacophony of sounds, even in my state of near sleep. The insects continued their tireless chorus, a high-pitched buzz that somehow lacked the irritating quality it held just moments before. Even the distant chug of the steam shovels, the harbinger of another brutal day, now felt distant and muffled, almost a comforting lullaby. It was a sound I'd become intimately familiar with, a rhythm to the slow, relentless march of time in this humid, jungle-clad land. A small ache lingered in my right shoulder, a constant reminder of the day's labor. But even that pain felt subdued, less sharp, somehow absorbed by the comforting hardness of the wood beneath me. I imagined the wood itself had a memory, a record etched into its very fibers of countless bodies that had rested there before me, their weariness mirroring my own. Each rough grain held the silent testament to the shared hardship, the silent endurance of countless others who had faced the same oppressive heat, the same endless work, and the same longing for home. The child, nestled beside me, slept soundly. His small breaths, soft and regular, were a comforting counterpoint to the heavier sounds of the night. His small hand rested lightly on my arm, a surprising comfort. The small weight of his hand on my skin provided some comfort. His presence provided a strange comfort, a small testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the continued hope even in the face of oppressive misery. A sense of quiet contentment washed over me, a small island of peace in the vast ocean of my exhaustion. For the moment, my pain felt distant, muted by a blanket of quiet exhaustion and the unexpected solace of a simple night's rest. I drifted, finally, towards the deep, dreamless sleep my body so desperately craved.
Awakened by a gentle shaking of my shoulder, I blinked, disoriented. The dim light of the barracks still clung to the edges of my vision, the remnants of a restless, dream-filled sleep. Then I saw him, the captain. He stood over me, his shadow stretching long and thin across the rough-hewn planks of the floor. His face, usually etched with the stoic determination of a man shouldering a mountain of responsibility, was grave. A furrow deepened between his brows, a stark contrast to the usual relaxed lines I'd grown accustomed to seeing. He spoke in a low voice, his words carefully chosen, each syllable carrying the weight of urgency. "A critical piece of equipment has malfunctioned," he murmured, the sound almost swallowed by the humid air. "The steam shovel near the south cut, it's jammed. We need to get it moving again, and quickly." The words hung in the air, heavy and thick like the humid breath of the jungle itself. A chill, unrelated to the dampness of the barracks, ran down my spine. The steam shovels were the lifeblood of this operation, the metal beasts that tore through the earth, shaping the very canal itself. A malfunction? It was a disruption to the carefully orchestrated rhythm of our lives, a threat to the progress, to the entire project. My stomach clenched. My exhaustion, so profound just moments before, was momentarily eclipsed by a surge of adrenaline, a stark, unwelcome awakening. The captain continued, his gaze steady, unwavering.
He explained that several skilled mechanics were already working on it, but they lacked a specific component, a small but crucial gear, he clarified, a vital part without which the entire mechanism remained crippled. It seemed this gear was a unique part, not readily available on site. He stated its absence was severely impacting the overall work schedule. He looked at me, his eyes searching, assessing. "You're one of the few who understands the intricacies of those machines," he said, his voice gaining a slight hint of hope. "You have a knack for problem-solving, a quick mind." He paused, his gaze lingering on me for a moment, a silent request, an unspoken burden placed upon my weary shoulders. He didn't need to explicitly ask. I knew what was expected. I knew that despite my aching muscles, my throbbing head, and the lingering exhaustion that clung to me like the damp jungle air, I had a task. I had to help get that steam shovel running again. The thought of failing, of letting down my fellow laborers, the captain, the entire project, it was a weight far heavier than any shovel I'd ever lifted. But I couldn't refuse. I couldn't. The steady rhythm of the insects, the distant sounds of the camp, even the steady hum of the faulty steam shovel now felt like a soundtrack to a new kind of burden, one of responsibility and reluctant determination. The captain placed a hand briefly on my shoulder, a silent gesture of trust. Then he turned, his tall form disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom of the barracks, leaving me alone with the weight of the task. The silence of the early morning, broken only by the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the distant hum of life beyond the walls of our tired shelter. The captain's hand, rough and calloused from years of similar toil, rested briefly on my shoulder. The weight of it, surprisingly heavy, felt strangely comforting in its familiarity. He didn't speak, not yet. Instead, he produced something from his worn satchel, a rolled-up blueprint, stained with grease and sweat, the paper itself brittle with age. The scent of old oil and damp earth clung to it, a familiar aroma that spoke volumes about the relentless work we all endured. He unfurled it slowly, the faded lines of the diagram shimmering faintly in the weak morning light, filtering through the canvas awning of our makeshift workshop. It was a steam shovel, its intricate workings laid bare in a complex network of lines and symbols. This wasn't some grand overarching plan. It was a detailed schematic, the lifeblood of our operation. The captain's finger, thick and strong, traced a jagged line across a specific section, pointing out a missing component. The missing part, he explained in his low, gravelly voice, was the crucial piece causing the entire machine to sputter and fail. A tiny detail, a single broken cog, yet it was the difference between progress and standstill. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the weight of our shared responsibility. The blueprint felt strangely warm in my hands, almost alive. I traced the faded lines with my own fingertips, each stroke a silent acknowledgement of the task ahead. The paper crackled under my touch, a delicate whisper of history etched in grease and sweat. The captain's words, few as they were, resonated deep within me. They weren't just instructions, they were a silent challenge, a testament to our unwavering purpose. It wasn't a request, but a subtle reminder of the collective burden we carried, the fate of the canal resting, at least for this moment, on my shoulders. My own hands, calloused and weary, felt clumsy and inadequate in comparison to the precision of the engineer's drawing. The intricacies of the machine were a maze, and I felt a flicker of panic. The daunting task threatened to swallow me whole. But there was a different sensation, too, a familiar surge of determination, the same drive that had kept us all going through relentless rain and oppressive heat. This wasn't just about fixing a machine. It was about proving our resilience, about pushing through the seemingly insurmountable odds. The humid air hung heavy, thick with the scent of sweat and machinery, but it was a familiar scent, almost comforting in its predictability. The buzzing of flies and the distant clang of hammers became the dull roar, almost a white noise in the background as I carefully studied the blueprint, searching for any clues. The small metallic scent of the engine's oil was in my nose, adding to the overall environment. My mind raced, trying to mentally piece together the missing component from the faded lines, visualizing the precise location of the missing part within the massive machine. The task was monumental, daunting even, but my resolve held firm against the weight of it all. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the workshop floor, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. Each mote seemed to magnify the weight of my responsibility, highlighting the potential failure looming large over the whole operation. But within that pressure, a sense of quiet focus settled over me, a steely determination to locate the missing part and restore the engine to its former glory.
The kerosene lamp cast long, dancing shadows across the greasy blueprint. The paper felt brittle under my fingertips, the faded ink a testament to countless hours spent wrestling with this behemoth of a machine. My head throbbed, a dull ache echoing the throbbing in my temples. The humidity clung to me, a damp shroud weighing down my already exhausted limbs. I traced the lines of the diagram again, my brow furrowed in concentration, trying to decipher the cryptic symbols marking the missing part. My fingers, stained with grime and oil, felt clumsy and unresponsive. The air hung heavy and still, the only sound the occasional drip of condensation from the metal framework overhead. A shadow fell across the blueprint, and I looked up. Another mechanic, his face as weathered and lined as the old wooden planks of the barracks, stood beside me. His eyes, though tired, held a spark of knowing, of experience. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, his presence a silent acknowledgement of the shared burden. The smell of sweat and oil, so familiar now, hung heavy between us. He had a similar oil-stained, worn mechanic's apron just like mine, and his boots were caked with the same red clay of the canal excavations. I could see the strain in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands, the unmistakable signs of relentless labor. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble, barely audible above the insistent hum of the nearby generator. "Looks like the same devil I wrestled with down in Trinidad years ago," he said, his gaze settling on the blueprint. "Lost the same blasted part, too." His voice held a weary chuckle, a sound tinged with the melancholy of shared hardship. He leaned closer, pointing to a specific section of the diagram. "Remember that little lever, right here? It's a bastard to find that one." His words were a comfort, a lifeline in the sea of my own exhaustion. He didn't offer platitudes,
just the quiet understanding of someone who had faced the same grim challenges. His voice carried the weight of shared experience, a silent reassurance that this wasn't an impossible task. He began to explain, his words painting a picture of the intricate mechanics, his fingers tracing the lines on the blueprint with a practiced ease. He spoke of the heat, the relentless humidity, the constant struggle against time, and the unrelenting pressure to keep the machines running. His words wove a tapestry of shared toil, a narrative of resilience forged in the heart of the jungle. He spoke with a weary confidence, born from experience, each word a quiet beacon guiding me through the maze of the diagram. His voice had slowed, its cadence mirroring the rhythm of my own heart, which was starting to slow and steady with relief. He detailed the location, a small, almost hidden compartment, explaining the trick to accessing it without further damage. His tone wasn't instructing, but sharing, his words connecting to experiences of a past I didn't even know, strengthening our shared bond. I felt a warmth spread through me, a quiet sense of camaraderie in the face of a seemingly insurmountable task. He pointed to the worn metal toolbox at his feet. "I think I have a spare." He rummaged through the toolbox, his movements slow and deliberate. Finally, he pulled out a small, precisely crafted metal piece, its surface still gleaming despite the years of use. It was the missing part. We exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between us, two weary souls united by the weight of their shared labor, and the quiet satisfaction of having overcome a seemingly insurmountable obstacle. The hum of the generator seemed less intrusive now, the humidity less oppressive.
The greasy metal felt cold against my skin, a stark contrast to the heat still clinging to my sweat-soaked shirt. The fellow mechanic, a wiry man with hands as gnarled as the jungle vines, held the newly repaired component steady. Dawn painted the sky in soft pastels, a muted orange bleeding into a hesitant pink. The air, though still thick with humidity, felt a little lighter, the oppressive weight lessened by the cool breeze that stirred through the broken machinery. The rhythmic click of our tools, a screwdriver here, a wrench there, was a steady beat against the silence of the pre-dawn hour. Each click was a small victory, a tangible step towards restoring order to the chaotic world of the canal. The old blueprint, its paper brittle with age and stained with grime, lay discarded on a nearby piece of scrap metal. Its faded lines, once a daunting mystery, now held the key to our success. We worked in a shared silence, punctuated only by the metallic whispers of our tools and the occasional grunt of effort. His movements were precise, years of experience etched into every careful maneuver. I mirrored his rhythm, my own clumsy motions guided by his expertise. The task, once overwhelming, became manageable, broken down into a series of small, achievable goals. The smell of oil and sweat filled the air, a familiar and somehow comforting aroma in this strange, harsh landscape. I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the same fatigue that weighed heavily on my own frame. Yet there was a shared sense of purpose in our work, a silent acknowledgement of our reliance on one another. We weren't just fixing a piece of machinery, we were mending a piece of this whole immense project,
a tiny contribution to a colossal endeavor. This small act of collaboration, this quiet communion of effort, felt larger than the task itself. As the last bolt tightened, a satisfying thunk echoed in the stillness. The component was secure, its weight settled into place. We stood back, our breaths mingling with the rising steam from the engine, observing our handiwork. A shared smile, weary but genuine, passed between us. It was a silent acknowledgement of our accomplishment, a small triumph against the crushing weight of the work and the unrelenting jungle. The sun climbed higher, its light growing stronger, chasing away the lingering shadows of the night. The air felt cleaner, lighter. The world seemed to have shifted slightly, its burden eased by a small shared victory. The rhythmic click of the wrench against the steel finally ceased. A satisfying thunk echoed the successful reassembly. Sweat beaded on my forehead, mingling with the grime already coating my skin. My arms ached, a dull, persistent throb that vibrated down to my very bones. My fellow mechanic, his face streaked with grease and exhaustion mirroring my own, let out a low, satisfied grunt. We had done it. We'd fixed the beast. The air hung heavy and still, the morning sun already climbing high enough to bake the earth. The usual cacophony of the construction site, the clang of metal, the roar of engines, the shouts of the foreman, seemed muted, almost distant, replaced by the quiet hum of our shared accomplishment. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on my colleague's lips. He wiped a hand across his brow, leaving a smudge of grease on his already filthy cheek. We exchanged a look, no words needed. We understood. Silence stretched, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects. Then a shadow fell across the work area. The captain. He stood there for a moment, observing us, his face etched not with the usual stern authority, but with a surprising relief. The weight of the situation, the pressure of keeping this monumental project on schedule, seemed to have visibly lessened from his shoulders. He was a man burdened by responsibility, a man whose every day was a battle against time and the unforgiving jungle. But today, something different was in his eyes. He approached slowly, his boots crunching on the loose gravel. The smell of his pipe tobacco, a scent I usually associated with the weight of his commands, carried a gentler note this morning, almost a hint of something akin to gratitude. He surveyed the now repaired steam shovel, his gaze lingering on the newly fitted part. Then he turned to us. Men, his voice was quieter than usual, devoid of the usual sharp edge. You've done well, extraordinarily well. This was a critical repair, one that could have set us back days, perhaps even weeks. His words hung in the air, surprisingly gentle. He paused, his eyes lingering on each of us in turn. There was a flicker of something I could only describe as pride in their depths. Pride, not in the monumental project itself, but in us, in our skill, our resilience, our shared dedication. It was an unexpected feeling, a small but significant shift in the usual power dynamic. Consider this, he continued, his gaze sweeping over the scene, a rare commendation, a moment to rest, a moment to simply be. He produced 2 worn but clean canteen cups from his pocket. Water, And then, after a proper rest, we'll have breakfast. Consider it earned. The canteen cups felt cool and comforting in my hand. The water, cool against my burning throat, was more than just hydration. It was a reward, a small gesture of respect, a recognition of our shared effort, a moment of shared humanity. The simple act of sitting there, side by side with my fellow mechanic, taking that brief reprieve from the relentless work, felt profoundly meaningful. We sat in companionable silence for a long time, enjoying the quiet respite and the unexpected lightness in the air. The sun was warming us, as was the unspoken gratitude, filling the moment with a quiet warmth that reached far beyond the physical.
A distant whistle sliced through the air, a sharp, insistent cry that shattered the brief respite. The sound, a metallic shriek swallowed by the humid jungle, was the signal. It vibrated through the earth, a physical tremor that jolted me from the lingering warmth of the shade, the unexpected comfort of a few stolen moments. The captain's words, his rare expression of gratitude, felt distant already, fading like a half-remembered dream. The old woman's quiet wisdom, the shared camaraderie with the mechanic, all receding into the background hum of the jungle. The whistle meant work. My fellow mechanic, his face already regaining its usual mask of weariness, rose without a word. He brushed dirt from his worn trousers, the movement slow and deliberate, as if conserving energy for the task ahead. The scent of sweat mingled with the earthy smell of the damp soil clinging to his clothes. He offered a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement of the shared fate that awaited us. There was no need for words. We understood each other perfectly. The whistle's insistent call echoed in the sudden silence that followed its shrill announcement. The air, still heavy with humidity, seemed to thicken, pressing down on me with renewed weight. The sun, previously obscured by the merciful shade of a wide-leaved plant, now beat down with renewed intensity. I felt the familiar sting of sweat prickling my skin, already damp from the residual heat of the previous hours. We walked back towards the excavation site, our steps heavy, the rhythm of our strides mirroring the rhythmic chugging of the distant steam shovels. Each step was a small act of defiance against the relentless fatigue that threatened to overwhelm us. The ground beneath my feet felt soft and yielding in places, betraying the hidden instability beneath the surface of the seemingly solid earth. In other areas, the ground was hard and unforgiving, each footfall a reminder of the relentless physical toll this work exacted. The faces of my fellow laborers, scattered across the vast expanse of the canal's unfinished form, all bore the same expression, a blend of weary resignation and stoic determination. Their movements were slow and deliberate, their bodies seemingly bending to the weight of the unending work. The air around them vibrated with the low hum of exertion and the relentless clamor of machinery. The sheer scale of the undertaking dwarfed us, making our individual efforts seem almost insignificant. Yet somehow, within this vastness, there existed a shared sense of purpose, a quiet understanding of our contribution to this monumental project. As we approached the excavation site, the noise intensified, a symphony of grinding metal, churning earth, and the shouting of foremen. The intense heat radiating from the recently churned earth was almost palpable, a tangible wave of warmth that assaulted our senses.
I could taste the dust in the air, a gritty reminder of the work that awaited us. The rhythm of the machines, relentless and unforgiving, echoed the relentless rhythm of our lives here. The whistle had sounded, and the relentless cycle continued.
The rhythmic clang of the steam shovel, a familiar lullaby of labor, had just begun its morning symphony when a shadow fell across my workbench. It wasn't the usual shadow of the midday sun, but a darker, more substantial one, the captain. He stood there, his silhouette stark against the brightening sky, his face etched with a concern that went beyond the usual worries of a delayed project. The air, usually thick with the smell of sweat and damp earth, suddenly felt thinner, charged with an unspoken urgency. He spoke quietly, his voice a low rumble that cut through the rising din of the worksite. "Landslide," he said, the word hanging heavy in the air like the humid breath of the jungle. "Blocked the northern supply route. Needs clearing, and it needs clearing now." His gaze held mine, and I saw in it not just concern, but a weariness that mirrored my own, a shared burden under the weight of this colossal undertaking. The news hit me like a physical blow, a sudden shift in the already demanding rhythm of our existence. The landslide. It conjured images in my mind, tons of earth, mud, and rock, a monstrous obstacle swallowing the path that fed our very lifeblood, the supplies that kept us going. It meant a halt to the progress, a disruption to the carefully choreographed dance of men and machines, a threat to the fragile balance of our daily lives. The captain continued, outlining the plan, his words precise and efficient, devoid of any unnecessary flourish. A small team, he explained, would be assembled to assess the damage and begin the arduous task of clearing the path. He looked at me, a quiet understanding passing between us. I was part of that team. My heart sank a little. The relentless sun, the bone-deep ache in my muscles, the constant dampness clinging to my skin. All of these faded into insignificance before the sheer scale of the task ahead. The landslide wasn't just an obstacle. It was a symbol of the unpredictable nature of this endeavor, a reminder of the raw, untamed power of the jungle, a stark challenge to our human ambition. My thoughts raced, already picturing the scene, the sheer face of the mountain, the unstable earth, the risk of further collapse. The tools, usually familiar companions, suddenly seemed inadequate, flimsy against such overwhelming power. But there was no hesitation, no question of refusal. We were bound together, a band of brothers in this shared struggle, each man relying on the other. The captain's silent trust was enough. The captain laid out the plan, and I watched as a small but sturdy group was quickly assembled. A foreman, a seasoned mechanic, a couple of younger men whose faces showed a mixture of apprehension and eagerness, and myself. We were a diverse group, bound together by the task ahead. Each of us, I knew, carried our own burdens, our own weariness. Yet, in that moment, we were unified, a team facing an unpredictable future. The familiar rhythm of the steam shovels faded into the background as we prepared to face the landslide, the unknown waiting on the other side. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and crushed rock. Sunlight, fractured and weak, struggled through the gaps in the landslide, illuminating the chaotic jumble of mud, timber, and broken earth. The captain, his face brim under the sweat-streaked grime, barked orders, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic clang of picks and shovels. My fellow laborers, their movements slow and deliberate, worked with grim determination. Each swing of the pickaxe a small victory against the overwhelming mass of debris. The weight of the mountain pressed down on us, both literally and figuratively. My muscles screamed in protest with each heave of the shovel, a familiar ache that was quickly overshadowed by a new, sharper pain, a dull throbbing in my ear. It was a faint sound at first, almost imperceptible against the backdrop of the landslide's groaning and the grunts of the men working. A muffled cry. I strained to hear it again, tilting my head, trying to isolate the sound from the cacophony of the disaster. Yes, there it was again, a faint, desperate whimper. It seemed to be coming from beneath a massive, unstable rock, a jagged monolith that leaned precariously over the rest of the debris. Its dark shadow cast an ominous pall over the area around it. I glanced at the captain. He was absorbed in directing the other men, his back to me, his face a mask of grim concentration. The decision clawed at me, to ignore the sound, to continue with the task at hand, to help clear the crucial supply route. That was the logical choice. The captain's orders echoed in my mind, a sharp counterpoint to the small, vulnerable cry from under the rock. But the sound, so fragile and helpless, tugged at something deep within me. The urgency of the cry was almost palpable. Sweat beaded on my forehead, trickling down into my eyes. My breath hitched in my chest, and I felt the panic rise, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. It was a child, I was certain of it. The high-pitched nature of the cry, the way it broke and wavered, left no doubt in my mind. The rock, massive and unstable, threatened to crush anything beneath it. And the captain's orders, a grim responsibility that seemed almost unbearable given this new, overwhelming urgency. The weight of my decision pressed down on me, heavier than any rock. A rescue attempt would undoubtedly delay the crucial clearing of the supply route, possibly endangering more lives in the long run. But to ignore that sound, to let that whimper fade into silence without even trying, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I approached the rock cautiously, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The other men worked on, oblivious to my silent struggle, their faces blurred by sweat and dust. I dropped my shovel with a thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of my own internal conflict, the unspoken choice deafeningly clear. My hands trembled as I reached for the small pickaxe at my waist. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges. The air, still thick with humidity, felt lighter now, the oppressive weight of the day finally beginning to lift. I sat on a low, rough-hewn log, the wood warm beneath me, watching the slow fade of light. The rhythmic chirping of crickets had begun its evening chorus, a familiar lullaby that had become oddly comforting. The child, small and quiet, slept nestled against my shoulder. His breathing was even now, a soft counterpoint to the rustling leaves and the distant hum of the camp. He'd been scared, terribly scared, his small body trembling when we found him trapped beneath the rocks. But now, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, he was safe. The old woman, her face etched with lines that spoke of a life lived fully, sat beside me. She hadn't spoken much, but her presence was a silent reassurance, a testament to the quiet strength I'd seen in her and others these past months. She offered me a piece of dried fruit, its sweetness a surprising burst of flavor against the backdrop of relentless toil. The captain approached, his silhouette dark against the fading light. He didn't offer words of praise or commendation, just a nod of acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the day's events, the unspoken weight of responsibility, and the quiet triumph of endurance. There was no grand celebration, no fanfare, just the slow settling of the night, the gradual dimming of the vibrant colors in the sky, replaced by the soft, inky blackness of the jungle. The sounds of the night, the insects, the distant machinery, even the snoring of my fellow laborers, were less jarring now, more like a comforting drone. My muscles ached, my bones felt heavy, my mind still raced with the events of the day. But there was something else, too, a quiet sense of satisfaction, a deep-seated weariness mingled with a strange, unexpected calm. We had faced danger, confronted exhaustion, and still we persevered. We had helped each other, shared our burdens, found small moments of kindness amidst the hardship. Tomorrow the sun would rise again. The steam shovels would clang, the earth would be moved. The work would continue. But tonight, as I lay down on my cot, the child sleeping soundly beside me, I felt a sliver of something akin to peace. The weight of the day was gone, replaced by a quiet hope, a simple faith in the enduring strength of the human spirit. The sounds of the night lulled me into a deep, restful sleep, a sleep earned through shared hardship and quiet acts of compassion. The Panama Canal was far from complete, but somewhere in the depths of this weary heart, a tiny seed of hope had taken root.